Dr. Jenny Powers, thanks so much for coming on to Evolutionsoup all the way from Denver, Colorado. You are a researcher and writer, having earned your PhD in immunology from the University of Colorado, Denver. And now, along with co-author Luke Comer, you've released your first book on the origin of being, understanding the science of evolution to enhance your quality of life. Welcome to the show, Jenny. Well, On the Origin of Being was released last June, so how did the launch go and how is it being received?
Yeah, well, I thank you so much for having me on Evolution Soup. I follow you on Instagram and I enjoy your content for sure. So the launch was really fun. It was kind of a highlight moment for my in my life to finally have a book published. But since then, we've gotten a lot of pretty good reviews on Amazon and we've gotten a lot of good reviews on Goodreads. I've been on about 25, 30 podcasts since it launched, and it, I feel like it's generally been received really well. Talking to other scientists, talking to those who, are in the health and wellness industry, I think it resonates with a lot of people who are already doing this kind of thing in their own lives or their own practices. And it was just nice for them to see the scientific evidence to back it up. Because this book is for the general public, for everybody to read, for everybody to get this knowledge, but it is very heavily researched because we wanted scientists to enjoy it too. And we didn't want people just to take our word for it. It was our intention when we started writing this book that it wasn't going to be based on our own experiences. We weren't going to try to reframe something. We were going to let the science talk for itself. And so, kind of what we want everybody to get from this book is just to learn how different parts of our physiology, different parts of our behaviors evolved, and really to see in this modern day and age how mismatched we are. Our genes and our environment, our environment changed so quickly, and it's kind of compelled the way that we live, the things that we eat, how we sleep, how we move through the world. All of these things have changed so dramatically that it no longer serves our biological needs, our evolved needs. So we're hoping that this book will kind of take people on this journey and will help them realize some of the reasons why things aren't working, and then bring some of some of what our ancestors taught us into the present to help us live better lives.
And it is part of a trilogy, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, that is. This is the first book in the trilogy. We actually go over 10 different behaviors, and this one covers the first 4. And we have 2 more coming out in the next couple of years.
Before we dive into your research, let's just hear a little bit about your background. Jenny, can you describe the road that led to where you are now?
Sure. Yeah, well, I grew up an Air Force brat. My dad was in the Air Force, so we moved around a lot. My favorite place to live was Alaska. I think it really was very important in developing my love for being outside, being in nature, being in the environment. My dad's last assignment was in Washington, D.C., so that's kind of where I went to high school. And I played basketball in high school, and I was recruited to the University of Colorado to play basketball, which was a very exciting time. And while I was there, I studied chemical engineering and I got a degree in chemical engineering. After I graduated, I worked for a company that made heart lung bypass machines and blood oxygenators. And so they had all of the engineers go through and see our products in use. So I got to go see an open heart triple bypass surgery. And I was in the room and I was looking at the doctor holding the heart. And I thought to myself, "Oh my gosh, I think I'm totally in the wrong in the wrong field." Um, because and I just thought going back to school and studying biology and maybe being a doctor, maybe being a PhD, but it really resonated with me more so than anything I'd ever done before. So I kind of went back to school. I took a basic immunology class, and that blew my mind. And so I decided to pursue immunology as a PhD. And so I studied at the University of Colorado, like you said. Again, it was in Denver this time. And I studied the innate immune system, macrophages, and inflammatory cytokines and things like that. But when you work 80 hours a week and you're so tied up in what you do is makes you what your worth is, I really feel like it took its toll on my body and my mind, and I really burnt out and became really depressed. And your body suffers when your mind suffers, and so I was kind of starting to realize that maybe this type of 80-hour week work in academia wasn't necessarily aligned with what I wanted to do, how I envisioned my life. And so probably the best thing I ever did for myself, even though I loved learning about the human body and the miracle of life. We're so complicated but so amazing. I will never forget all of the lessons that I learned, but being in that academic setting just was not for me. So I left academic science and I came home and I raised my two kids. And I also started something that I'd ever since I was a little kid. I wanted to be a writer, and but I never had any examples, and to me, maybe it just didn't seem like it was the I didn't think I could do it, and then maybe it didn't seem like it was the most successful kind of thing to do. But I finally gave myself that opportunity to write, and I loved it so much. And it really tied into being able to have like flexibility with my kids. But interestingly enough, I started writing middle grade fiction, which is 8 to 12-year-old age range, so children's literature. And I wrote science fiction and fantasy. But as you know, writers don't get paid very much, so I needed to find something else to do to help pay the bills. And so I started looking for jobs, and I found this ad from Luke Comer, and he was looking for a researcher and a writer. And I thought that I really fit right into his job description.
Jenny, what was it about Luke's vision for this book that appealed to you and led to this collaboration?
Yeah, well, when I first interviewed with Luke, we hit it off, and he was very passionate about his interests and kind of this vision he had for this book. And so in his life, he had really found that modern society was not meeting his biological needs. And so he started researching, evolution and nutrition and physiology and all of these things to try to figure out what he could do to improve his quality of life, his physical and mental health. But while he was doing this, his focus was primarily on nutrition. And he's actually written a book that deep dives into nutrition that's coming out next year. But he noticed along the way that what the modern society provided us to eat wasn't the only thing that was kind of mismatched to how we evolved, or what we evolved to eat, how we evolved to live in certain ways. And the more he talked about it, I had little like light bulbs going off in my head, because I'd always felt like there was something, I was burnt out and depressed and just unhappy. And I felt like there was something wrong with me. But what was really cool when talking to him was that, well, my genes are what they are. And maybe it's just the outside world is not providing me, kind of like what Luke found out. It's not providing me with what I need to be healthy, to be happy, to thrive. And so what he kind of laid out really resonated with me, in terms, especially, the work, when you started talking about how we just don't work the same way, because that was something I really struggled with when I was in my postdoc. Like I said, like I talked about before, working 80 hours a week and not feeling like I'm worthy unless I achieve greatness or whatever. And also the nature part. So he also realized that we no longer interact with nature in the same way. And ever since living in Alaska, and my parents always took us camping, and I live in Colorado. It's the most beautiful state to hike and camp and just be out in nature. Again, it was like, well, maybe things that, nothing's wrong with me, but something's wrong with how we are treating our bodies, and it's totally in misalignment with our evolved natures. And it totally resonated with me. And I also realized that it was just this wonderful opportunity to use my scientific training that I'd spent, more than 10 years, getting under my belt, and being able to tie it into my passion for writing. And so when I left academia to write, I never thought I'd be writing nonfiction. But after I met Luke and heard about this project, I was just completely on board.
Your new book traces our evolution from single celled organisms all the way to modern humans and proposes the idea that whenever humans live in accord with their evolutionary design, it can lead to greater physical and psychological health. Jenny, can you give our audience an overview on the origin of being and what you hope it will achieve?
Yeah, of course I can. So like I sort of alluded to before, when Luke held his vision, he had these 10 different ways of being that he wanted to investigate. And our first book included these first four ways, and we kind of like to categorize them as kind of more of our basic needs. So this first book covers sleep, nutrition, how we work and rest, and how we interact with nature. So we kind of felt that these four were these foundational basic needs that everything else is built off of. And so that's where we started. And as you alluded to, Mark, we took each of the behaviors and we started in single cell organisms billions of years ago and tried to see how those behaviors showed up. Circadian rhythms is a very good one to think about because even the beginning cells at the very beginning of life had evolved circadian rhythms. And so then we move to higher organisms and higher organisms, and then we spend a lot of time looking at primates, our hominid ancestors, and then we do spend a lot of time talking about what we can find about hunter gatherers. And while I did this research, I studied genetics, medicine, anthropology, so many different disciplines of science. And I tried to bring it all together into kind of this narrative that will kind of give people hopefully a very interesting kind of history lesson. And when we spend a lot of time on hunter gatherers, before we even get to modern humans, I have a feeling that people who read the book are going to know what I'm going to say when I get to modern humans, because talking about how our ancestors lived, how our hunter gatherers ancestors lived, they just live so differently than we did. And I don't think we realize how fast things changed. And as people who know about evolution know, it takes really long time for a very large population wide adaptation to spread to everybody. And what's really interesting about humans is that we're so creative and so intelligent that at some point we sort of were able to use technology, medicine, all of these things to tackle some of these big problems that we were facing instead of having to rely on evolution to do it. And so we kind of started to bypass the need for evolution. And I'm hoping that people will realize that, wow, we really are still kind of genetically, we're made up like hunter gatherers. Our genes are hunter gatherer genes. And yet, how different our environments are, people will be able to be like, oh, yep, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. But when you do get to our modern humans, I think it's important to point out, yes, we are living this way. And these are the consequences. You hear about chronic diseases that are on the rise. We call these the diseases of modernity. And there are things like heart disease and obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension. So we can study the hunter gatherers who survived into modern times. They just simply don't suffer from those chronic diseases. And so something changed and our health is suffering. And so I'm hoping that people can kind of like, rather than just being in this minutia of their everyday lives, like look back and see, the forest for the trees, and be able to connect some of these things together and maybe connect some of their lifestyle choices with their health. And then after the modern human section, We have a section that we like to call Closing the Gap. And that is, although sometimes people think like, oh, I want to go back and live as hunter gatherers and it's this romantic thing. We really don't want to go back and live as hunter gatherers. The modern world is so amazing, and we have so many amazing innovations that make life fun and easier. But there are things, while we're in the modern world, we need to start learning how to integrate some of these old ways of being back into our daily lives, into our lifestyles. And so the last chapter of every section kind of talks about, okay, well, what did we learn from our hunter gatherers, from all of our ancestors, and how can we apply this to our everyday lives? And so that's kind of really why I put it's scientific self-help book. I want to put that in quotes because it's not the typical self-help book, like I said before, where we take you through our own experiences. We really try to let the science and the build of information get to the point where people really understand and can synthesize, yes, these are things that we can do, and these are things that are necessary. But I also wanted to say, when I was writing the book, I got really overwhelmed with how far off I felt we were and how many of the things that I wasn't doing. And I started getting down on myself because I'm like, oh, well, how come I'm not doing this? How come I'm not doing that? But then I realized, you know, it's not our fault. Kind of like I was talking about before. We live in this rat race. We live in this very fast-paced modern society, and we're in this river, the river of our culture, and it's going really, really fast. And most of us don't know better why things are going wrong. Then I often think that people blame themselves, and they have shame, and they blame themselves for things rather than seeing the forest for the trees. Like, okay, this is a systematic, like, bigger thing than just our own self-will. And so what I want people to not I don't want people to be overwhelmed by how far we are from where we evolved, but I want people to know that taking one little small step at a time really, really works. And we can talk about this later. We can talk about this now. I for a really long time, it was really hard for me to start practicing some of these tools that we give at the end of the chapters. But I'll tell you, when I started, I started with diet, I started with movement, I started with, getting more sun, and we'll go into that in the next chapter, or the next question. These tiny little incremental changes that I made in my life to bring more hunter gatherer into my present modern life, I started feeling better and better and better and better. Nothing, quitting academia, pursuing writing, I still had depression. I still didn't feel good. But after I started doing some of the things that we recommend, and I started slow, and then it started to snowball a little bit. I started feeling better, so I was starting to able to do more of what we asked. And now I feel like I'm in this really good place mentally and physiologically. And I mean, I'm almost 50 years old, and I just feel so much better. I feel just so much more alive, and I think it's because of this different perspective, this evolutionary perspective that I have brought into my life, that just really, really helps, ground things, and helps me realize, okay, this sounds great, but is it really great for me? Is it really going to help me? So that's what we hope this book will, as those, we teach, an understanding. We go through what our ancestors were doing. We go through what we're doing now, and then we give tools. And we really hope people can take those tools and, like I said, implement them and start seeing changes in their life.
On this show, we frequently discuss human evolution and hominid ancestors. Your book partly focuses on our human predecessors, specifically hunter-gatherers. Jenny, how does the lifestyle of our hunter-gatherer ancestors compare with modern humans, and what might we learn from those ancient peoples?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm just going to give an example from each of the four sections of the book. So we start with sleep and circadian rhythms. And I think the big thing about that people will learn from our ancestors, it wasn't that they slept, they didn't go to sleep when the sun went down and wake up when the sun came up. They didn't sleep 10 hours a day. But what was very unique about them is because they were very in touch with, they lived outside. They were exposed to the rhythms of the earth, the rhythms of our planet. So night and day, warm and cold, light and dark. And so their bodies, so I was talking about circadian rhythms before, and circadian rhythms are the things that are the little timekeepers, in our brain and also in all of our cells that like time the processes in our body, like hormone production, digestion, our levels of alertness and sleepiness. The circadian rhythms control all those things. And our ancestors, since they were exposed, and outside, they every single morning their circadian rhythms were reset by bright light, because our circadian rhythms are they're most sensitive to light as a way to kind of reset. And so when hunter gatherers, when they wake up in the morning, they're exposed to very bright sunlight in the morning. So it's just twice as much, 10 times as much as what we get in the modern day. But then as the sun starts to go down and starts to set, you get less and less and less light. And then when the sun went down, they had no light except for firelight or moonlight. And those particular wavelengths of light did not trigger our, activate our circadian rhythms or reset our circadian rhythms. And so when they got reset and they were entrained in the morning, and so by the time the sun went down, their bodies were prepared to start releasing melatonin, to start decreasing cortisol. Our body temperatures go down, and all of these things signal our bodies to go to sleep. And so they would go to sleep when they were tired, and then they would wake up, and it'd be about the same time every morning, and then the cycle would start again. They'd get really bright light in the morning, and then the light would kind of dissipate off, and then it would be dark, and they would go to bed a couple hours after sunset. And so they were really, really entrained, really in sync with the day and night of the planet. And so their bodies were in rhythm. Their processes of their bodies were in rhythm. And that is why for most of I think all of the hunter-gatherer cultures that were studied don't even have a word for insomnia, because I don't think they experience it quite the same level that we do. They don't get, maybe they get 7 to 8 hours of sleep in general, but they sometimes wake up at night, and a lot of them take naps. But they didn't have this, I'm going to say epidemic again. They didn't have this epidemic of being tired all the time and sleepy and having to require, caffeine to wake up, and sleeping pills at night to try to help you sleep. And so I really think that at least in training, learning how we can entrain our circadian rhythms in the modern world, because we're in air-conditioned, we're completely isolated from the elements in our homes, in our offices. We have artificial light all day long and way into the night. And so when we wake up in the morning, if this is the peak sunlight, we'd get maybe, I don't know, a fraction of what sunlight would trigger our circadian rhythms. And then, I'm going to switch hands. And then we get that same amount of sun, or that same amount of light all day long if we don't go outside. And then when the sun goes down, outside is dark, but we still have this twilight level of light. So it's kind of like the same amount of light all day long in our, in our offices, in our homes. And our circadian rhythms don't know what to do with that. I think modern human circadian rhythms are really dysregulated because they don't have that reset every morning with bright sunlight and then dark, and then bright sunlight and then dark. We kind of have this equilibrium of level of light. that we're being exposed to. And so, of course, our hormones are dysregulated. And of course, we're not sleepy when we want to be sleepy, which is at night, because all the screens that we're looking at, blue light happens to be the wavelength of light that we're most sensitive to, and our screens are just pouring blue light into our brain, into our eyes, and so our bodies just don't know what to do. Our bodies are all confused. And so I really think so. One of the tools, or a couple of the tools that they're kind of tied together, is modern humans need to get outside and entrain their circadian rhythm. So in the mornings, bright sunlight in the mornings. It doesn't have to be for very long. I like to walk my dogs in the morning, and so that really helps me make sure I get sun. And then at night, there are all kinds of tools that you can use. I have blue blocking glasses that I can put on. All of our electronics these days have settings where you can have redshift, or it's night shift. So they actually, the phone or the device will actually decrease the amount of blue light that is being generated and you're being exposed to. And that'll really, really help with your circadian rhythms, realizing, okay, it's time to wind down. It's time for sleep. We're not going to be constantly triggering our circadian rhythms with that blue light. And so that is just one of the tools that we give to try to help modern humans live more like our ancient ancestors. So then for the next part, we talk about nutrition. And what I hope people will understand is that human evolution, especially the evolution of our brains, and the nutrition that allowed these adaptations to survive and be passed on, nutrition and human evolution are very intricately linked together, because it really does matter what we put into our bodies. And so our hunter-gatherer ancestors always ate whole food. While we did process food by grinding or soaking or fire cooking to make things easier to digest and easier to absorb, we still ate the seeds, the skin of the fruit or vegetable. We ate the husk and the bran of the grains. We ate, if we're talking about animal products, we ate we didn't just eat the muscle meat. We ate the organ meat. We ate the connective tissue. And so so the food that nature provided us, we ate, and we ate it whole. So when the agricultural revolution started, this trend towards decreased diversity of food and increased reliance on just one staple, the agricultural revolution actually really, really did a number on our health, because we moved closer together. There was more communicable diseases that people would gain. Farming was really, really backbreaking. If your one staple crop failed, there was risk of starvation. And it changed our social structures a lot as well. But we were still eating whole foods, right? We weren't picking and choosing what part of an animal we ate, or we're only going to eat the flesh of the fruit. We still were eating whole foods. Then we fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, and all of a sudden we have these industrial processes that now we can isolate individual ingredients from our foods. So we can isolate pure sugar. We can isolate white flour, get rid of all the bran, all the fiber. We isolate all of these vegetable oils, and all of these ultra processed foods are now, we use these components. We use the sugar and the flour and the oil, which are part of a food. They're not whole foods. And then we make new foods out of these manufactured ingredients. And that is the majority of what we see on the shelves at the grocery store, at least in the United States. So this ultra processed food, where all the nutrients are stripped from it, the fiber is stripped from it, and we're basically, we're ingesting things that are absorbed into our bloodstream so quickly and at such large volumes that our bodies don't know what to do with it. And so when we have all this, we have high blood sugar, our bodies do the best that it can to to make the nutrients go where it needs to go and make sure that our blood sugar goes down and release insulin to help the cells take up this blood sugar. But over time, eating these things that we were never exposed to as we were evolving, and we have not evolved in the last 200 years to know, our bodies don't know what to do with this ultra processed food. I really think that we've lost sight of what is food really doing for us. It's not just calories, right? Our bodies need more than just calories. Our bodies need fiber. Our bodies need vitamins and minerals. We need all of the macronutrients, carbs, fats, and proteins in their whole form, because that's how our body evolved to use them. And so I think just knowing that we did process food, and we did use our brains to overcome nutritional problems, but now I feel like our intelligence and our technology, we've kind of overshot a little bit. We have this industrialized process so we could feed more people, but we didn't take into account that what we were feeding the people in this world, especially in the more industrialized world, it's not the food that we evolved with. People like to call it frankenfood. So there's, we talked about the refined sugar and flour and oil, but there's also preservatives and all kinds of artificial flavors, artificial colors, artificial sweeteners. None of these things, our bodies do not know what to do with these things. So it does the best they can, but at the same time, it's going to result in some pathology. And we're seeing that with all of these metabolic chronic diseases. So the third part in our book, we talk about work and rest. And what we hope people come away from that part is that I think we have this vision of what hunter-gatherer life must have been like, that we had to work all the time and it was hard and it was brutal. And there was this conference in the 1960s called Man the Hunter. And at that conference, a totally different picture of how hunter-gatherers lived and worked kind of emerged, because I feel like, they were finally being able to study hunter-gatherers that weren't pushed to the extremes of our world, because most of the hunter-gatherers that survived into modern times were pushed to the places that agriculturalists didn't want. They were pushed to the deserts, they were pushed to the Arctic. And if you look at some of these, there are a lot of hunter-gatherers who did have tough lives. But if you think back to when the hunter-gatherers, we were all over the world, maybe spread all over the world, the population of a large city was just spread all over the world. We were living in all of the fertile areas from the poles to the tropics and everywhere in between. And we were able to, the work that we did, because we had so much, nature provided so much for us, we didn't have to work all the time. There are a lot of studies into the hunter-gatherers that have survived, that they only do food obtaining activities for 15 to 20 hours a week, and the rest of the time they rested. They would do the arts, sing, dance, create. They'd visit. They had these intricate social networks with other bands that were part of their larger group. And they would just really enjoy life, play games, sing, all these kinds of things. And so the modern culture of work, and this is how it's always been, is definitely not true. Hunter-gatherers had this thing called an immediate return economy, which means that whatever their efforts were to hunt or to gather, they would eat it, they would utilize it immediately, hence immediate return economy. And so they didn't, most groups didn't store food. They would bring it back to camp. Maybe they would eat it when they were, eat some of it when they were hungry out. They'd bring it back to camp and they'd share it with everybody. And then they were done. They met their needs, and now it's time to do something else. And because they had this immediate return economy, and because our ancestors had more of like a circular view of time, they were really able to kind of be in the present moment. And being in the present moment was actually an evolutionary survival mechanism, because they had to know what was going on around them to, make sure they weren't predators, or to make sure that they, took shelter, and they were certainly more in touch with how they felt, in terms of, are they hungry? Are they hurt? Their bodies were that's all they had to survive. You know what I mean? So I feel like the way hunter-gatherers approached their work, and just the way that they approached their life, they were very in the moment and very present. And they, because they had the circular view of time, they knew the seasons would come back. They knew the nature would provide for them. And so it's very, very different from our culture now. Once the agricultural revolution started, we started this thing called the delayed return economy. And that means that we'd plant the seeds, and then 8 months from now, we'd harvest the seeds. So our work wasn't rewarded until much later. It was delayed. And not only that, but to get from planting seeds to harvesting, we had to work every single day, to maintain and make sure that harvest actually happened. And what happens now, most of us aren't involved in the food industry. We work, and then a month later we get a paycheck. So that's kind of our delayed return economy. And I think because we have this more linear view of time, or our view of time has changed, and because we're everything is delayed before we can reap the benefits, we're very future oriented in our work and in our lives. And so I feel like that is what causes a lot of stress. And I think that's what causes a lot of overwork, because people are constantly worried about what's going to happen in the future. Because we're worried about the future, we're not being very efficient in the present moment. And so some of the things that we talk about in the book to kind of help with this overwork epidemic is learning how to become more present. And mindfulness and meditation have become such big deals in the world because it actually works, because it actually lowers your stress. And if you practice these kinds of things in work, you can focus at the task at hand. You can take care of your body better in the moment. You know what your body needs. And if you can lower your stress levels, then work isn't necessarily going to cause disease the way that it is now, because our stress is just so high. So if we can kind of know that work wasn't a grind always. We evolved when sometimes it was a grind and sometimes we had hardship, but for the most part, we had adequate food supply. We would harvest, or we would hunt and gather, and we would eat it, and then we'd go on to the next thing in our life. Hunting and gathering was important. Work was important, and work is important for us now today. But it kind of had its place. And then they were able to enjoy the rest of their lives. So we really hope that some of these tools and some of the ways that hunter-gatherers approached work will really help people in the modern world.
This is a fascinating and important work that you and Luke are doing, and I'm very grateful that you've been able to spare the time to come on to the show today. And what about future projects? Is there anything new and exciting you can tell us about?
Yeah, well, the exciting news, at least, the big news in my life, is that we're starting work on the edits for our next book, that we're hoping part 2, which covers more of our social needs, so social groups, child rearing, and the sexes. Those are the 3 main groups that we're going to talk about, and do the same kind of treatment. Take it through history, see how our ancestors lived, and then contrast it to how we're living today. So that will hopefully be out next year, maybe in the late summer, early fall. And then after that, book 3 will come out of the trilogy, and that book's going to tackle more of our higher needs. We call them cultural needs, and that tackles the arts, spirituality and religion, and ceremony and ritual, which are all very important parts of our hunter-gatherer society that we're starting to lose a little bit in our modern world. So hopefully that'll be a year after that. The other exciting news is we are going to be producing and releasing the audiobook of the first one relatively soon, and so be on the lookout for that. Like I said, I have been on many podcasts. I think probably the best place to look for those would be in our YouTube channel, because I post them there. We're on The Origin of Being on YouTube. We also have a website, www.ontheoriginofbeing.com, which tells a little bit more about the book, has some excerpts of the book, has a place you can purchase it. It's available at all online retailers, such as Amazon and Barnes and Noble, or wherever you get your online books. It is an ebook as well, so you can download it and read it as an ebook. Yeah, it's very exciting. I feel like we're starting to gain some momentum. We're starting to see book sales. We're starting to see just a lot of people who are interested in just knowing, and it encourages me to see how many people I follow on social media and what I'm hearing in like the general media. A lot of people are starting to focus on this modern problem that we're having of these chronic diseases really shortening the lifespan and the health span of our modern humans, and that these things are striking younger and younger and younger people. And so it's really heartening to see more and more people kind of tackling this issue, addressing this issue. And I feel like hopefully our book can be part of that conversation. And I really hope that it helps people just really start to think more about ways that they can really impact their health and wellness. And that's just by living the way that we evolved to live, by providing our bodies and minds what they need, what they evolved to need.
Jenny Powers, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I really enjoyed getting to know you, and I look forward to hearing more from you.